I'll try.
Okay, good, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually, let's wait one more minute and then we'll begin.
So Shu will be open on Saturday,
Yeah. Not
9
the
o'clock,
not not the class
9
in the morning, just 9:30.
9:30.
9:30.
And you figure we'll go till 11:30?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Mm-hmm. So how have you been these days?
I've been good. I've gotten back to almost full activities in the office. I sort of miss not working long hours, but you know, I have to you know, take care of people, pay the bills, and you know, fortunately, the office there's people coming in today. I had 12, 13 people. Only one didn't want to come in. We did a telemedicine, but everybody else came in. And yesterday, about 75% came in. So, you know, people are starting to come out. I think they feel safe. You know, they're coming, you know, now for social gathering, you know, and we keep the office, you know, safe with chairs spread out. Everybody wears masks.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. That's great.
Good luck.
Okay.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Let us begin. So tomorrow evening is the 26th yard site of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. I don't know how it's coming across. If this is blocking the picture, do you see?
No, it's clear. You're in a little box in the corner on the right.
Oh, just in the corner. Interesting. Okay. So what we're gonna dive into something is that we don't really get. People don't really know this. The Rebbe was a prolific writer. He received the most mail in the United States after the president in the 1980s. And he used to read every single letter that he received. And even when he suffered a heart attack in 1978, he would read his letters from his makeshift hospital room every single day that they arrived, and they tried to convince him to take a break. And he said, I'm going to read all these letters anyway, so why come back to triple amount of work? Let me just read them today. And many of them he would respond to. And to date, over 35 volumes of his letters have been published. And so it's over 10,000 letters that are published. Obviously, the names are taken out and it's anonymized. And we don't always have the letter that was sent to the Rebbe, so we don't always know what the Rebbe is responding to. But it's and one thing the Rebbe made clear, that a response to one person is not necessarily a response to another person. So I'll give you an example to illustrate that. There was once a woman who wrote into the Rebbe about a relationship she was in, or she was meeting a certain man, and should she go through with the, you know, develop it deeper into marriage. And the Rebbe told her no, not to continue in that relationship. So when she broke off the relationship, the other party, you know, started investigating what was the reason that she broke it off. And finally it came out that she wrote into the Rebbe, and the Rebbe didn't think it was a good idea. So they're like, that's impossible, because we wrote into the Rebbe about this relationship, and the Rebbe said we should go forward with it. So this woman came to the Rebbe and asked her, can you clarify? So the Rebbe said, you know, there's a message for him. For him, it was good to continue with the relationship. For you, it wasn't good. Yeah. So, the purpose of reading these letters is not necessarily to say that, that you really need to seek counsel on how to apply these letters to personal use. But the letters that we're going to share today, I think, are more universal answers. But the reason why people read through the letters is because you get a general sense and an idea of how a great man, a great leader thought about the world. And he responded to everyone. He responded to world leaders and kindergarten teachers, people asking for rabbinic advice, people ask great Torah scholars, people asking practical business advice, sharing good news, sharing sad news. Unfortunately, the Rebbe mostly received sad news. That means, Rebbe, I need help. We're going, my son was diagnosed with a bad surgery. It needs a difficult surgery. And the Rebbe always used to complain, how come you don't share with me the good news? Share with, you only come to me with the bad news. But that was, but the Rebbe received many letters. Before we dive deep into what we're going to view today, which is one of his letters, or maybe if we have time, we'll go into a second letter. I just want to give you an example. He responded in many different languages. The Rebbe knew many languages. So the Rebbe responded to people in Russian, in French, in English, in Hebrew, in Yiddish. Those were the most common letters. There's a story where someone came to him, and someone from Morocco came to visit the Rebbe, and afterwards the Hasidim asked him, I don't understand, what language did you speak to the Rebbe? If you don't know Hebrew, you don't know English, and you don't know Yiddish, so what language did he speak to the Rebbe? He said, I spoke Arabic. And the Rebbe responded to me in French, but he spoke to the Rebbe in Arabic, and the Rebbe understood. So that's just something interesting. Okay, so here for the first slide is something I just put together 10 minutes ago. It's just a cute example of what you're seeing in these letters is the Rebbe's wisdom, but also the Rebbe's sensitivity. So here, on this side of the screen is a sample letter from the Rebbe. It's written in Hebrew. And this letter was written to a young girl who's now a teacher in Pittsburgh. I don't know her name. But she wrote to the Rebbe a letter, and she assumed that the secretaries of the Rebbe sometimes read through the letters. So on the bottom of the letter, she wrote a code. And in the code, she wrote, Rebbe, I wish you a blessing to have children, even though it was decreed that you don't have any children. The Rebbe and the Rebbe did not have any children of their own. And so she wrote a blessing to the Rebbe that he should merit to have children, but he wrote it in code. And the Rebbe responded to her letter with a whole letter. And then in the bottom, put this small line over here. And I magnified it over here. And this is the Rebbe's response. Now, if you don't know that it's a code, it seems like random letters. But the girl shared with us what the code was. Basically, what she did was she took every letter and she substituted with the next letter. So A equals B, B equals C, C equals D. So the Rebbe responded to her with this code. And when you substitute each letter with the letter that goes after it in Hebrew, after the shin goes the saf or the taf. After the hey goes the vav. After the gimel goes the dalid. It reads Toda al habracha. Thank you for the blessing. So you just see over there the Rebbe was reading. The Rebbe was a speed reader. The Rebbe would read through thousands of letters and respond to them very quickly. So here's just one example where you see that. Okay. Any questions before we dive deep?
So she gave him the code also, I assume?
No.
Oh,
She
he
did
figured
not
it
share
out?
the code. She just gave she wrote the code without writing the key to the code. And the Rebbe figured out the key to the code and responded using the same key. Okay. And the Rebbe signed every single letter that he was written. And And once they wanted to get the Rebbe one of these like stamping machines, to just stamp your signature quickly. And the Rebbe said, people write to me their letters. They spend a long time deliberating on their letters, and some of them, their letter comes soaked in tears. I'm not gonna just automate, my signature. So that's fun. And this the Rebbe did till he was very, very old. Okay, now let's go on to the letter. What we're gonna do is we're gonna read through. This is quite a long letter with a few paragraphs. We're gonna read the letter. And apparently it was written to someone. We don't have the letter of the person, what this letter is responding to, but it's a couple of paragraphs, this letter. We're going to read through the whole letter, and then we're going to break it down to try to make sense of the letter. Okay, so we need a volunteer.
I'll volunteer.
Okay.
So HB Tishrei 135717 from Brooklyn, greetings and blessings. In response to what you write regarding your state of mind, there are realities that exist outside of a person. There are also internal realities within a person. Finally, there are things whose reality consists only in the way we think about them. At first glance, it may seem that because these thoughts are real, it makes no difference what the source of the reality is. But the truth is otherwise. A person possesses the ability to evaluate their own feelings, to assess their veracity and validity. This internal evaluator influences our state of mind also when it operates behind the scenes, in what is commonly referred to as the subconscious. Also, when this process is not consciously sensed, it is taking place in our minds. It is obvious that the thoughts about which you write in the letter are the third type of reality, which is more easily overcome than the other two. Furthermore, often these thoughts and feelings will go away on their own when the person stops thinking about them, either due to external factors or when the person resolves to put them out of their mind. Certainly, you know all this already, but sometimes hearing it from another person, verbally or in writing, brings greater clarity. My hope is that the same will be the case in this instance. I am enclosing a copy of the communal letter I wrote for the past Rosh Hashanah. In it, you will find my view on the number of the points you touched on in your letter, both by allusion and more explicitly, and which are contributing factors to the thought and feelings about which you wrote to me. There is an expression used by the sages, Mashirav, actual practice is the most powerful, meaning that when an action was followed in actual practice, this constitutes the strongest proof. There are many hundreds and thousands of people who once in a state of mind, such as you described, who overcame it without it leaving any negative mark at all, which implies that the same will eventually also be the case for those whom some remnants of this state of mind still linger. It is only that, as is customary in our world, one doesn't hear about the experience of all those people, as these represent the normal and natural course of events, whereas the small minority of cases where this does not occur at all gets all the publicity.
Okay.
Now, everything that I said until now would apply if there was a need to discuss and explain these matters. However, if we are to contemplate for even a moment the tasks which each and every one of us called to fulfill in his life, namely to illuminate the world by strengthening and spreading the way of life that follows the directives of our Torah, the Torah of life, thereby influencing our portion in the world and certainly our immediate surroundings. There remains no available time in which to indulge in thoughts about yourself of the type you write about in your letter. Granted, in the beginning, it's not easy to shift one's mental focus from thinking about oneself to thinking about one's task in God's world. But each time we do it, the shift becomes easier, especially when one does it joyously. The basis for this joy being what Maimonides writes in the end of the laws of Luva. Igrot Kodesh, volume 1422.
Okay, so that was quite a long letter, and thank you for reading it all for us. So now what we're going to do is we're going to break down the paragraphs of the letter. And in the beginning of the letter, in the beginning of the letter, the Rebbe explained to us, that there are three types of reality. The first type of reality is an external reality. If there's a hurricane, that's real. It doesn't matter if you believe in the hurricane or not, the hurricane's happening. If there's a pandemic closing down the economy, it doesn't matter if you believe in the pandemic or not. It's basically reality. And there's no use, although we have to do our best to try to ease the situation and weather the storm, but if we deny reality, it leads to big problems. So we have to come face to face with reality. The next type of reality is an internal one, where it's our personality traits, our habits. These are more internal realities, and they're also quite real. If we're not in touch with who we are, that leads to great frustration. For example, if we think that we are supposed to be something that we're not, it constantly leads to great resistance and trouble. And so you kind of have to embrace it, and you kind of have to work on changing it over time, slowly, into the best, beautiful package. But the third reality is a reality of perception. That means you have two people looking at the same set of facts, and they see it entirely differently. One person sees a dangerous situation, a horrible situation, a fearful situation, and the other person sees opportunity and positivity. There were once two shoe salesmen. They arrived in an African country, and one sent back a report to headquarters: stop the shipment of shoes. Their sales won't work. Nobody here wears shoes. And the other salesman sent back a letter: send as much shoes as you can. There's so much opportunity over here. Nobody wears shoes. So this reality of perception, we have the ability to, it's a switch. We have the ability to change how we see things. So that's the Rebbe starts off the letter explaining these three types of realities, and arguing with a natural tendency that people feel, if all feelings are valid. So if it's a valid feeling, if it's real to me, then it's real. It doesn't matter if it's based on reality or not. If it's real to me, then it's real. And the Rebbe rejected this. The Rebbe said, we're not machines. We're not, you feed in some data, you feed in some input. The input is this circumstance, this situation, and a person will respond. No, we have free choice. We have free will to judge how we're going to see reality and adjust. If we were overly fearful of a situation, and then we realize that nothing wrong happened, it was over-exaggerated, our fear, then we have to learn from that, and in the future be less fearful, and not allow, and we can use that internal judge to say, these are the perceptions that are helpful to leading a good life, and these perceptions are just pull me down and are toxic. So that was the first thing. Now, the next thing, before we, hold on, I just want to see how many slides there are. Okay, so there's actually not too many slides here. Okay, so let's go back to let's take it page by page. Okay, so that was the first thing that the Rebbe covered here. Now the Rebbe says, when we're adjusting our perception of reality, sometimes we're adjusting it consciously, and sometimes we're self-judging it subconsciously. We're not even aware that there was a subconscious decision being made that this perception of reality is wrong. Let's curb it. Let's push it away and change it for another one. So, consciously, we could see someone cut us off. There was a parking spot that we wanted to get, and someone cut us off and took the parking spot. And we could get angry until we see that outside is out walks a woman that's clearly in labor and going to the hospital. And then our judge tells us, okay, this was actually normal. I'm glad that I didn't really need to be the first spot. She clearly needs it more. So that's a conscious state. This thing, the Rebbe says, is also happening subconsciously to us, that we're constantly a impulse comes up and gives us a certain perception of reality, and quickly another side of ourselves rejects that interpretation and replaces it with another. And so these are happening all the time. And the Rebbe tells him that it's obviously that the thoughts that you're dealing with are not thoughts that are based on real objective reality, whether external or internal. They're just matters of perception. And therefore, you have the ability to change it. But the Rebbe says 2 points here. There's 2 ways to change it. Either you could change it by taking some classes and recognize your biases and your negativity bias, and then improving your training your judge to be a better judge of whether your perception is correct. Or you have another option here. The other option is just to stop thinking about it consciously, and automatically your subconscious will hopefully deal with it in the right way. What that means is sometimes we're going sometimes when we we're obsessive about a certain negative thought. The more we obsess on it, even if we try to change it, it actually makes the issue worse. So for example, if I tell everyone that's listening to this lesson, stop thinking about a pink elephant, the more you try to stop thinking about the pink elephant, the more it pops up into your head, just because that's the nature of what we're dealing with. So it is possible to change your thoughts and your perception, but the Rebbe says sometimes the easier approach is to just stop thinking about it altogether, replace your thoughts with something else, and automatically you'll stop dealing with the negative perception. So let's imagine that this person was feeling very down on himself. He was feeling like I'm a no-gooder, I can't do it. I cannot get things done. Whatever I set my hand to do always fails. So either he could get into a whole debate with himself. Am I a failure or am I not a failure? Is this a real perception or is this just an imagined perception? And he could either have the whole debate with himself, whether he's really a failure or it's only in his head. And the Rebbe is advising, he says, you don't really have to do the work consciously. What you could do is you could redivert your energies elsewhere, and your internal judge will automatically, subconsciously correct your assessment to a healthier approach, which is usually not in an extreme way. Usually the real reality is you're not a perfect person. You sometimes make mistakes, but overall you could do a good job. You have certain skills that make you able to get things done. And that's usually the correct reality. But when we start to become obsessive about a certain negative perception we have, as much as we negotiate with ourselves, it just becomes a bad trap where we like, oh, you are good enough. Actually, I remember that time that I failed, so I'm not really good enough. Yeah, but there was a time that I succeeded. And you could go on forever. So the Rebbe is saying, this reality, this perception needs to be changed. So change it, but you don't necessarily have to change it on a conscious level. You could change it on a subconscious level by diverting your attention elsewhere. Now look at the next paragraph here, where the Rebbe, you see the Rebbe's great sensitivity, because, in this paragraph here, where sometimes when you have something that's deeply troubling you, right? Something that deeply bothers you, and then you go to seek counsel, and the person counseling you gives you advice that's so simple, it leads to you feeling like he obviously doesn't understand what I'm going through. He obviously, his answer, his solution is too simple. Here I'm telling me that I'm a wreck and I'm worthless and I'm a no-do-gooder and I spent months thinking about it. And now the Rebbe is saying, focus your attention elsewhere. So when someone writes that, there's a natural resistance. So look what the Rebbe writes to him. The Rebbe writes to him, certainly you know all this already. The Rebbe is saying you probably know this. You probably really know that obsessing on your perception is not really helping much, and that this is a perception that you have the ability to change, and the best way to change it is by diverting your attention. The Rebbe says the only reason that I'm mentioning all this to you is not because you don't know it, but sometimes hearing it from another person verbally or in writing brings greater clarity. My hope is that the same will be in this case, in this instance. Okay, any questions before we move on? Okay, so let's go on to the next section. In the next section, the Rebbe says, I'm enclosing a copy of the communal letter I wrote for this past Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe used to send out communal letters, which were published in various newspapers, and sometimes Chabad Lubavitch would take out an ad in the New York Times and publish the letter. It was sent up before Rosh Hashanah, before Passover, other big occasions. And just last week, they actually published 2 volumes, which contain all the Rebbe's English letters compiled in one. And this letter was in 1957. And the Rebbe says, in it, you will find my view on a number of the points you touched on in your letter, both by allusion and more explicitly, and which are contributing factors to the thoughts and feelings about which you wrote to me. So if we have time, we'll go through the letter at the end of the lesson. That's the last slide, is that letter. But in a nutshell, the Rebbe says that, as humans, we tend to tell ourselves a story of the fight between good and bad. We imagine that there's 2 forces. There's an evil force and a good positive force, and they're battling over each other. And it's a question of which one will oversede. Will the goodness in humanity come forward, or will the evil of humanities come to the front? And the Rebbe says that it's not, from the Jewish perspective, every good thing is eternal and accumulative. So versus darkness and negativity doesn't accumulate. And what the Rebbe was saying, when someone does a good deed 1,000 years ago, that good deed has an impact on the world forever. Versus when someone does a negative thing on the world, that negative doesn't accumulate to all other darknesses. All other darknesses that follow are a result of that darkness, but they don't add to that darkness. They just continue on in that darkness. So, for example, Adam and Eve ate the fruit and brought darkness to the world. The next person to sin is now not bringing more force to the world. He's just continuing in that same vein. Versus when someone does a positive, it's a cumulative and it sticks together. It's like a sticky. So ultimately, good will automatically prevail because it's not equal forces. One force, the good force, lasts forever, versus the negative force falls away with time. So when we have, and that's the Rebbe was basically trying to tell him, that focus on positive thoughts and don't think, okay, I have 10 negative thoughts every day and 10 positive thoughts, so I'm basically nowhere. And the Rebbe was saying, no, every day that you have one more positive thought, it stacks up, versus your negative thoughts don't really stack up. Now we'll look at that letter later if we have time. Okay, now the Rebbe is saying here something practical. The Rebbe says that sometimes practical observation proves us that many people have negative thoughts and are able to push them away. And he felt, this person writing the letter apparently feels that it's a lost battle. He'll never be able to get out of this trap of darkness. And the Rebbe was saying, you know, we could either get into a whole theological discussion of whether it is possible to overcome this, or we could look at the data and see, do people overcome these negative struggles or not? And the Rebbe writes here that there are hundreds of thousands of people who were once in a state of mind such as you described, and who overcame it without it leaving any negative mark at all. In other words, this person felt that he has a negative state of mind. Even if he overcomes it, the damage is already done. And so let's say it was a perception of negative self-worth. So he's like, okay, even if I'm able to move on and now be optimistic, at the end of the day, before I had these negative thoughts, I felt innocent and pure. And now I have this, my innocence has been shattered. My purity has gone away. And the Rebbe is telling him, that's not true. You could always restore your innocence. Now, he says, now, how come you don't hear about these stories? The Rebbe is trying to say, from a data perspective, most people do overcome it. And you can imagine the person saying, yeah, where's the data? So the Rebbe will say, the Rebbe doesn't say it here. All the Rebbe says here is that, of course, you won't hear about it because it's not newsworthy. The news is that when people get sick, when people get better, that doesn't make the news. So we could imagine that the Rebbe knows about it from the thousands of people that wrote the letters to the Rebbe. The Rebbe knew how many people went through these struggles, and then saw the amount of people that were able to overcome these struggles. So in the Rebbe's view, that was real, but the Rebbe didn't share that with him. The Rebbe was just saying, the reason you don't hear about it is that one doesn't hear about the experience of all these people, as these represent the normal and natural course of events. Whereas the small minority of cases where this does not occur gets all the publicity. No one talks about the cousin who had a mental breakdown and now is leading a normal life. But people do talk about the cousin who fell into depression and never got back on his 2 feet. So the Rebbe is saying, just because people talk about it doesn't make it the norm. The next thing, the next thing is the Rebbe was saying, this is all good if we're trying to find the solution to your problem. We're looking at your negative thoughts, your self-perception, your negative self-perception, and we're discussing what's the best way to overcome it. So either we could be consciously, actively changing our perception, or we could divert our attention elsewhere and then subconsciously change it. But the Rebbe says the truth is, we shouldn't even have time to try to fix this problem. We should be focused on our mission in life. And our mission in life is to be there for others, to help others, to bring light into the world. There's so much work to do in making the world a better place that there's no time to fix all our issues. If we fix, it's like the person who lives to 100 with a healthy body, all his muscles are working, he didn't have a single ache, he's healthy, but what did he do in his whole life? His whole life he was worried about his health. So what was the whole purpose of his living? To be healthy? That's not a purpose. So in the Rebbe's view, and this is counterintuitive, of course you have to take care of your health. And of course you have to take care of your mental health as well. The Rebbe is saying is sometimes we won't be able to fix all our mental health issues in one lifetime. There's just too, Everyone has a psychosis. Everyone has a mishigas that they're dealing with. And we can't spend our whole life trying to achieve perfection and rid ourselves of all our psychosis and all our issues. Instead, what we should be focusing on is on our mission. And automatically, most of the issues will go away. And if not all the issues go away, fine. But at least we accomplished something in this world. So that's what the Rebbe is saying over here. However, if we are to contemplate for even just a moment the task which each and every one of us is called to fulfill in this life, namely to illuminate the world by strengthening and spreading the way of life that follows the directives of our Torah, the Torah of life, thereby influencing our position and our portion in the world and certainly our immediate surroundings, there remains no available time in which to indulge in thoughts about oneself of the type you write about in your letter. So the Rebbe is saying there's 2 points here. Number 1, who has time to fix all your issues? Number 2, by diverting your attention to your mission at hand, you'll automatically fix most of your issues. So most issues that are connected to a false perception of reality are fixed by focusing on your mission. As soon as you're focused on what you're here to do in the world, then those issues fall away. Now the Rebbe says, granted, in other words, simple doesn't mean it's easy. The solution is simple, doesn't mean it's easy. It's not easy to shift from one state of mind where you're constantly seeking solutions to your psychosis and issues, and all of a sudden switch and say, I'm going to put that all behind me. I'm going to focus on what I'm needed for. But the Rebbe says, each time we do it, the shift becomes easier. And it's now the last thing is the Rebbe references the basis of, especially when one does it joyously. In other words, the Rebbe is saying to change you could change your habit. And the way habits work is that each time you fight against your habit, the easier it becomes. So for example, if you're someone that wakes up 10 o'clock every day and you decide from now on, I want to wake up at 5:30. So the first 3-4 times will be very difficult, but with after 3-4 times, it'll get a lot easier. The Rebbe says this transition of breaking your habit can happen even quicker and be more enduring if you do it with joy. Instead of saying, you know what, this habit is bad. I have a 10 o'clock habit and I want to break it and I want it to be 5:30. If it's done with sadness, you can do it. But if you do it with joy, you say, you know what, I'm going to get this done and I'm going to do it with joy. Then the transition will be a lot stronger. And he quotes Maimonides, and we're going to read here that piece from Maimonides. Let's read this piece from Maimonides. We need a volunteer. Any volunteers? I'm going to choose Charlie because your mic is on. So
I
you're.
don't have my glasses on.
Oh, so Ken.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. The joy that a person should experience in the fulfillment of the mitzvot, the love of God who commanded them, is a great service. One who is haughty, according honor to themselves and elevating their self-estimation in these situations is a sinner and a fool. The one who humbles themselves and makes light of their own person in these situations is truly a great person worthy of honor who serves God out of love. Thus David, king of Israel, declared, I will hold myself even more lightly esteemed than this and be humble in my eyes. For there is no greatness or honor other than rejoicing before God. As it is stated, King David was whirling and leaping before God.
Okay, so let me give you some background to this story. King David married the daughter of the previous king, King Saul. Now we know King Saul and King David became arch enemies. King Saul tried to kill King David numerous times. but anyways, King David was King Saul's son-in-law, as interesting as it is. Okay, so what happens is the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant, and they had it for numerous years, maybe a decade, maybe even longer than a decade. And finally, the Jews recaptured the Ark of the Covenant and were bringing it to it was like a more permanent tabernacle. It wasn't the Bet HaMikdash that wasn't built till King Solomon's time. The Holy Temple in Jerusalem wasn't built yet, but it was like a permanent, but it didn't even have a proper roof. It was like a tent-like roof where they brought the ark. And when this happened, King David was so joyful that he started dancing and making somersaults and in front of the public. And Michal, King David's wife, was saying that's you debased yourself in front of the maidservants, in front of the masses. A king has a certain aristocracy, a certain royalty that he's not allowed to debase himself this way. And King David responds, if that is your concern, I will hold myself even more lightly esteemed than this and be humbled in my eyes. In other words, the way to achieve true happiness is not by pursuing happiness. That doesn't work. The way to true, and we think the more we aim for self-perfection, the happier we'll be. Right now, I'm miserable, I'm unhappy because I'm a broken person. When I achieve perfection, then I'll be happy. And what Maimonides is telling us, that's not the way it works. The way we achieve true joy is by submitting ourselves to something greater than ourselves, to something higher than ourselves, by being humble and saying, it's not about me, it's what I'm needed for. And that's how we achieve true joy. And that's what the Rebbe is hinting at the end of the letter here, that especially when one does it joyfully, when someone submits himself to his mission and abandons his pursuit of self-perfection, then he'll achieve real joy, and then most of your issues fall away on the wayside. So that's that letter, and I guess why not take the opportunity to read. This is the letter that the Rebbe sent out. This is the letter that the Rebbe was referencing that year. And with that, we'll end this lesson. So we need another volunteer for this letter. Who's going to be our volunteer? Okay, I'm going to take the lead on this letter, unless we have a volunteer.
I could do it. I could do it again. Not a problem.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. To the sons and daughters of Israel everywhere, blessings and greetings. As we approach the close of the old year and the onset of the new, every earnest individual makes an audit of the past year upon which to base their resolution for the year to come. In order that the audit should be accurate and the right resolutions be made, one must be careful not to overstate one's virtues and achievements. It is no less important, however, not to exaggerate one's deficiencies and failings. For feelings of despondency, not to mention despair, God forbid, are one of the greatest hindrances in a person's endeavor to better themselves.
Hold on. Okay.
Unfortunately, it is possible that even if one does not exaggerate one's faults, an honest accounting will show that the negative side of one's spiritual and moral balance scale is quite formidable, perhaps even as outweighing one's positive side. But also in such a case, a person has no cause for despair. For in addition to the deep regret of the past and the firm resolve for future change, which the audit should elicit, one must always remember that everything good and holy is eternal and indestructible, as these stem from the soul, the spark of godliness within us, while negative deeds are only temporary and can be rectified and eradicated through true and proper teshuvah. The appreciation of the above truth should call forth in every individual regardless of what their stock taking of the previous year shows, a feeling of encouragement and hope for the future, knowing that only their good deeds are eternal and have illuminated their own life and that of their family and of all Israel, as all Jews are accountable for each other, bound to each other as a single entity. From this, it is also obvious that even if one sees signs of a general decline, that humanity as a whole is not getting any wiser or more virtuous in truth. The good in the world grows greater and more powerful every year, every day, and every moment. For each moment, good deeds are added to the accumulating good in the world. So even if the not good seems to be prevailing, this can only be temporary. Ultimately, the good shall gain the upper hand and the negative shall be utterly nullified. For the creator and ruler of the universe has decreed that ultimately all will do teshuvah, and that he will accept their teshuvah so that none shall be forsaken.
Isn't that a beautiful, positive message? It's very powerful. Now, I just want to just share my thinking as you were reading that, Ken, of something I saw recently, where the scientists showed a video where you see two weeds that one of them they sprayed a chemical at both of these weeds. They sprayed weed killer at both of these weeds, and you're watching these weeds. It's a sped up video, maybe spanning a few days or a few weeks, and one of the weeds look that like they're about to die out and all shriveled up, and the other one is staying strong and beautiful. And then the scientists asked the audience, which one do you think mutated to survive and which one didn't mutate and is going to die out? And when you're looking at the two clips, you're like, okay, obviously that one, the leaves are all wilted and it has no path forward. The other one it's a few days in and it's so bright and strong. And then you see, they continue the clip, and then you see the one that was all fresh looking dies out, and the other one that looked all wilted regenerates and survives the chemical attack. And the way they hypothesize is that the weed that developed a resistant trait in its genes learned that when you're attacked by these chemicals, put all your energy on the essential essential components of the plant, and don't worry about the externals. And the other plant didn't learn that, and so it's trying to maintain its whole external self and its whole look, and ultimately it doesn't last. But what you see from here is that even if the world looks like it's falling apart and it's falling to pieces, the Rebbe says ultimately the goodness is forever and eternal and accumulative, and ultimately everything will work out good in the end. Tomorrow night, everyone's welcome to join us for a beautiful workshop we're going to do with Senator Joe Lieberman and YY Jacobson. I announced it in the email yesterday for 8:30, but now I'm thinking maybe 7:30 is easier for people. It's quite long. It's like an hour or maybe even longer, with some music in honor of the Rebbe's 26th yard site. And then Thursday is the bris. So if you plan to attend either of them in person, tomorrow night is only on Zoom and YouTube. Thursday's bris of my son. That's in person or on YouTube and Zoom. Anyways, I was glad to see you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
So Ken,
Yes.
are you still there?
I'm here.
Were you there by the beginning of the lesson?
I think I was a minute late.
I want to show you, this is quite amazing, that I added the slide to the beginning of the lesson. Here, I think you'll appreciate this because you know some Hebrew. Yeah?
Yeah.
Look at this letter. You see this small line?
Yeah.
Okay. I magnified it. I put it up over here.
Right.
Okay. This is a letter the Rebbe wrote to a girl.
No,
The
I
girl
saw
wrote a
that.
letter-
I was here for that. Yes.
Oh, you're here for that. Isn't that
Right.
fascinating?
Yeah, well, I haven't been able to switch the letters, but yes.
Here, I did it for you. I did it right here. I did the shin here. Shin.
Oh.
Hey.
Oh, Toda,
Yeah.
okay. Toda Yal Havaracha.
Tada al habracha. Thanks for the blessing.
Havaracha. Okay, very good. Okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
Very good.
Yes, I was supposed to have a lesson tonight, but it was called off, so I made your lesson.
Thank you.
Worked out well.
Very good. Okay. Be well.
Okay, be well, Rabbi. Mazel tov on the baby.
Thank you.
Enjoy.